Tonight, with Hashem, we're going to go over an introduction to the series, The 70 Most Difficult Questions, a series that I gave about 9 years ago. We will elaborate a little bit more. It's going to last most of the year. Every week we will do several questions. Difficult questions. You may raise some questions if you have some that are not included, and hopefully we will try to cover them. I decided to do an introduction, you will see why, to cover some of the points that perhaps were left out in the past. It's an important introduction as to this whole topic, questions and answers. Throughout history, during all of the galuyot, all the persecutions, all the diasporas, just about every country, the Jewish people, the Jewish faith was always being challenged. And Baruch Hashem, we were able to defend ourselves. It wasn't easy. Challenges came from all sorts of directions. But the greatest challenge of all, or the greatest danger of them all, is ignorance. When a Jew is ignorant of his emunah, of his Torah, when he does not know the basics, then he is weak. He's not able to contend with the challenges, even that spring out from his own mind. Challenges to one's faith, from one's questions and one's doubts. And the reality is that the only reason we have survived as a nation, other than, of course, giving credit to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is the shepherd, who has defended us from our enemies, obviously, it is to his credit. Nevertheless, if we look at it more in terms that we're more familiar with, it is the Torah. There were always Jews who would not give in, who did not give up the Torah. There was always a number of Jews, maybe not many, but a number of Jews who continued to teach the Torah, and as a result of the Torah, we're still connected. We're still a nation. We're still observant, even though not everyone is observant, but there's still a group of Jews who are faithful to the Torah and to the mitzvot, and all of this is because of the Torah. I'm talking about the various dangers and various assaults to our faith, to our emunah. We must not forget that in the past, and even in the present, we've been challenged by our own people, our own brothers and sisters. As the Pasuk says, those who will give you the most trouble, those who will destroy you, those who will give you a hard time will come from your midst, from amongst you. And we're talking about all kinds of trouble. But as an example, a challenge to the emunah came from groups such as Sadok and Baitus, that you may have heard, the Sadducees, who challenged the authority of the Chachamim, of the rabbis, to interpret the Torah. And it makes no difference what they challenge. The fact that something of the Torah is being challenged, some authority is being challenged, was already a grave danger for Am Yisrael. Because there are always two sides. There are always groups that are formed. There's always politics. People take sides. And division in itself is never healthy. But unfortunately, that was the case years ago. And it still is, that various groups come up with all sorts of ideas of their own that are contrary to what the Torah teaches. And this causes big problems, especially to those who are not knowledgeable. And they must take a side, and they may take the wrong side. So this challenge that they put up, of course, caused great problems. Baruch Hashem, they disappeared, but the symptoms did not disappear. The symptoms are always recurring. All sorts of challenges, even from within. Today, the greatest challenge of all, other than just plain ignorance, is the Reform movement, or perhaps we should call it the enlightenment, the Haskalah, the door of the Haskalah that began close to 200 years ago and sprang out mostly in Eastern Europe, later throughout Europe, and it even went as far as North Africa under a different guise, under the Alliance Française, in other words, under the French influence and other influences, which were not necessarily the Haskalah of the Jews, but was still under the same kind of auspices, the same kind of ideas of trying to enlighten the Jews with other beliefs, with other teachings, with the intention, at least that's what they said, of making them more intelligent, making them more knowledgeable, being more worldly, and not so narrow-minded, not such of a ghetto Jew. Yeah. Yes, they went all over the place, right? And who would they prey on? On those, of course, who were weak in knowledge, who did not have too much Jewish pride in themselves. They were much more vulnerable. And unfortunately, it happened to the best of families. That's incredible. If you read stories, we're talking about the best of families where the father and mother were observant, hardworking people. They kept Shabbat and kosher, but a son or a daughter would turn away, not overnight, but little by little. And this would happen because of the Haskalah movement. And what was going on in this Haskalah movement? Unfortunately, when people live in communities, live amongst goyim, live amongst other kinds of people, we absorb a little bit of the surroundings. We are tempted by what we see and what we hear. And as I will explain later on, this is exactly what happened to many Ashkenazi Jews. Living in the ghettos, being exposed to anti-Semitism, it was very tempting to assimilate, not to intermarry yet, Chaz v'Shalom, but to assimilate very similar to the ideas of the Mityavnim of the Hellenists during the Temple era. You heard of the Hellenists, the Greeks, right? We had trouble with them back then, trying to infiltrate Jewish society, trying to rob Jewish children from their emunah, from their Torah, by introducing all of these philosophies, all these strange ideas that unfortunately later on would compete. They would compete with Torah. And sometimes, unfortunately, they would win. It was more attractive. It was more interesting what they were teaching. It was in, they would say today. It was the style. People liked it. People were attracted to it. How did everybody else get along? How did everybody else, in other words, deal with these problems, with the Haskalah, with all these infiltrators, with all these other influences? Many times the Jews simply contended with these threats with something called tmimut. Tmimut means to be sincere. Tamim tiyem Hashem Elokecha. A Jew was tamim. I don't want to use the word naive because naive doesn't sound good, like he doesn't know anything. Tamim means sincere. His emunah is blind. He asks no questions. He's simple. He's not so intelligent. He cannot necessarily argue with you. All he knows is this is what he was taught. This is what his parents believed in. This is what we always fought for. And that's it. Tamim. And through that tmimut, Baruch Hashem, we were able to remain Jewish, to remain steadfast. But the tmimut was not always enough by itself. You needed intelligent Jews who were very smart, very worldly, very knowledgeable, to be able to deal with who? With the church. If you read history books, you know how many times the church said, bring your rabbi, we'll bring the bishop, the cardinal, we'll have a fight, we'll have an argument, we'll have a contest, let's see who wins. Now for that, you have to know to defend your religion. You can't just be tamim. Otherwise they were being faced with expulsion. If they lose, Baruch Hashem, we always won. So tmimut is important, but it also was not always enough. In order to deal with some of the challenges, you had to be knowledgeable in Torah. You had to know how to respond. So the emunah, from time to time, required chizukim. What chizukim means, it required strengthening. It needed to be strengthened by learning, by being able to respond to all these accusations. The blood libel, that's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous accusation. The Torah says clearly you can't consume blood. So we should bake it into the matzah? I mean, but people came up with, by the way, from what I remember, This accusation came from a Jew. Unfortunately, not a very orthodox Jew, a traitor. Nevertheless, they bought into it because they hate us. The Goyim don't like us, so they bought anything. Especially if he was coming from a Jew, he must know what he's talking about. He's Jewish. So we had to defend ourselves from all sorts of accusations, from all sorts of threats. But Tmimut was not always enough. That Tmimut, that Emunah needed Chizukim. It needed to be strengthened. It needed courage. It needed knowledge. And that is why the Ramban emphasizes very much in the beginning of his Yad HaChazakah that our Emunah, even though we are Tmimim, our Emunah is not a blind faith. We must remember that it is a requirement, he says. Leida, to know sheyesh Shem Matsui. I'm going to get to that. It is important that we know, not just believe blindly, that we know sheyesh Shem Matsui, sheyesh Shem Rishon Matsui. In other words, that there is a creator to this world. To know, not to believe. How do you know? By exploring, by investigating, by convincing yourself, by looking around at creation, at your own body, by coming to this conclusion. It's by design, it's for a purpose. There was no Big Bang. Whoever said that there was such a thing as, Darwinism, about evolution, just because he said so, we need to follow him. What right does he have to make a new religion? The reason people bought into that, of course, is obvious, because they want to get away from religion, not because it makes more sense. All the years, they accepted it was a well-known fact that God created the world. What happened now? People getting away from it. For obvious reasons. They love certain things, and if they believe in God, God doesn't allow those things. So you create your own religion. So the Rambam says you have to convince yourself, even though there are some who disagree with this approach, that we're all in agreement that a Jew needs to know a lot about his faith. It's not enough to be Tamim. He needs to know that Hashem created the world, that there's proof to this, that one can show evidence that there is a creator to the world. The evidence is to be found. Everything is documented. One has to be trained and taught in being able to defend his emunah. That's what the Rambam is basically trying to convey to us. Rabbis also tell us in Pirkei Avot, you have to become knowledgeable, so you can not only defend yourself from Goyim, but from Jews. What did we say before? We have trouble with our own Jewish brothers. Apikoros is usually a Jew, an atheist. He doesn't believe in the Torah, he doesn't believe in anything, except in himself. So you have to know what to answer. If you don't learn, how are you going to deal with him? And if you don't know how to deal with him, he might convince you to follow his religion, his cult, his ways. Therefore, learn as much as you can so you can deal with this individual if you ever meet him. And you know what? Chaz v'shalom, I don't wish it on anybody. It may be one's son. How do you deal with one's child if one's child is a rebel and doesn't want to believe? The father is not equipped to answer. Oy vavoy. The father is not equipped to answer the questions of his son. It could be a big problem. In the Haggadah of Pesach, we come across one of the most poorest souls. I call him a poor soul in his skin. Misheno yodea lishol. Right? We have 4 children in the Haggadah: the Chacham, the Rasha, the Tam, the Sheno yodea lishol, the one who's wise, the one who's wicked, the one who's a simple boy. But then we have the one that does not even know how to begin to ask a question. Whether he's bashful, whether he's simply ignorant, whether he hesitates, it makes no difference. You know how many are in this category today? They don't even know what to ask. They don't know that they need to ask. And that's a big problem. The Haggadah tells us, Atptah lo. You need to initiate. You have to arouse his curiosity. Otherwise, he may never ask. Arouse his curiosity. Bring him once to a class, give him a tape, and tell him, by the way, you know what it means to be Jewish? Did you ever think of that question? Why are you alive? What are you living for? Did you ever think of that question? You have to arouse people's curiosity. And you're never going to get a straight answer if you ask somebody in the street, oh, could you tell me why you are alive? What's life is all about? What is it for? I think he's going to run away from you if you ask him that question. He's going to be scared. He has no answer. Anyway, in such an environment where people do not ask questions, that is when all the cults are flourishing. Because even though people are not asking questions, the neshama is thirsty. The neshama is thirsty more than ever because humanity today, at least in some countries, is pretty satisfied with materialism. So they're not hungry or thirsty for more. Even though they always want more, they are suddenly seeing that life is so empty, that this is so meaningless. The neshama wants something, especially the Jew. The Jew's neshama is divine. It is searching for something more to be happy. So in this atmosphere, in this environment, where there's so much ignorance, so much detachment from our tradition, that is when who succeeds? All of these skatot, all of these cults, in grabbing or in convincing a Jew, come and join us. And he says, yes, sounds good. Why should he go for it? Because he's hungry for something, and if we don't get to him first, that's what's going to happen. And what are they really trying to do? Are they really trying to sell us the truth? They don't have any truth. They're just trying to further their interest, whatever it may be. Most of the time it's money. But even the ones who claim that they know the truth, that they want to save you, they're still trying to further their cause. They're not trying to be fair with you. Explore, after all, you're Jewish, maybe explore your own heritage. There were some non-Jewish gurus who have told Jews, go back to Israel. What are you doing here in India? You're a Jew. And by the way, everything I know is from your Torah. So you're coming to me. There were some honest gurus, some truthful gurus, that told the Jew, you don't need this stuff. This is for us. You have the Torah. You have something better than what we have. Very few that would admit that. Here's an Israeli who's willing to pay money. Why not? Take his money and teach him what he wants. Teach him some meditation, yoga. Send him off to the Himalayas. He won't know. He'll think it's great. No, there were some. Yeah. There were some honest gurus or some, honest individuals who realized what Judaism is, and if this man is a Jew, then that's where he belongs. But the majority of them will mislead because they have other interests. What I want to share with you right now is an incredible story of a young woman living during these times of haskalah, of reform, of enlightenment, of all sorts of groups trying to further their cause, preying on Jews. And this young woman, by the name of Sarah Schneer, made a tremendous revolution, which resulted in a tremendous contribution to Am Yisrael in this generation. The way I see it, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, that everything is in Hashemayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent down this very precious soul to be able to bring this about. And I'm going to briefly tell you what happened, and you will understand. It's an incredible thing. It used to be, up until the late 1800s, that Jewish girls did not receive a complete Jewish education. Very, very little. They were at home. They helped their mothers. Academically, they were not very advanced. They knew just very, very basic. Very basic. And at some point, these girls, as they grew up and they became adolescents, teenagers, they became curious. In Poland, as an example, they were inspired by all sorts of speeches and lectures that came from these movements, the Haskalah. Whether they were talking about Zionism, whether they were talking about Polish poetry, regardless of what it is, they were advancing all sorts of ideas that were tasty to somebody who never had this. And you know what this was doing to them? It was not only getting them excited and interested, it was making them turn against their parents. Abba, Mommy, you're so primitive. You don't know anything. You even don't know how to talk in clear, fluent Polish. Because most of the Jews, the religious Jews in Poland, spoke Yiddish, the Jewish language. You see, so they were turning against their parents all because of this influence. Here they were thinking, this is great. Some of them were shocked when they came to a lecture and they saw one of the attendants, a Jew, turn on the light on Shabbat. But if they did it and nobody opposed it and nobody said anything, they went along with it. You see how things happen? People move away. It was okay because he did it. Nobody said anything. Nobody got up. This is what was happening in Poland and in other Eastern European countries. Many of the girls, and young men too, but right now we're going to talk about the girls, were being swept away by this wave of haskalah, of enlightenment, trying to further their learning, not necessarily Jewish learning, but all sorts of things. And in this way they thought perhaps they will become more acceptable in Polish society, more prestige, more money, not primitive anymore. Maybe they will get more respect from the goyim. Everyone with his ideas. It became the in thing. And many girls who were not strong, even though the parents were strong, but they were not, were falling prey to this. And there was a young woman by the name of Sarah Schneer, who was a seamstress. A seamstress. You know, she made clothing. And she says, you know what? I can't take this. I can't see this happening. I have to do something about it. Here I am making clothes for the body. Perhaps I should begin to make clothes for the neshama. Perhaps I should do something to bring these girls back into the fold. So they should learn, but Torah, not Polish poetry, and not all this shtuyot. Because this, look at what's happening to them. They're being moved away. They're becoming anti-religious. And guess what? She had tremendous opposition for teaching Jewish girls Torah. From who? From Orthodox Jews, from rabbis even. Now we're not going to blame the rabbis, because the rabbis were a little bit afraid. This meant a big change in the curriculum, in what everybody was so used to. Teach them Torah, this was never done. What are you going to teach them? They couldn't be convinced, but the problems were happening, they were real. She did it on her own. She took girls, she made a little class here, a little class there. From 20 girls it became 40, it grew to 100. Until eventually, some very good people found out about her project and her ideas, and they adopted it, and they helped her. And it received the blessing of great tzaddikim like the Chafetz Chaim, that apparently the time has arrived for Jewish girls and Jewish women to learn Torah on their level, whatever it is that they can learn, whatever it is that they need to learn, and in this way to save them from the clutches of the haskalah. And before you knew it, Baruch Hashem, the group grew, and many girls entered a system called Bet Yaakov. That is how Bet Yaakov was formed. To provide Jewish girls from early on, and even to the age of seminary, an opportunity to advance their studies in Torah, to make them righteous women, women who can raise a home, a Jewish home, a strong home, a home that will be so strong as to prevent any of these influences that are out there from creeping into the home and destroying it. Because that's what was happening before. Homes were being destroyed. Girls, not even boys, girls were moving away and doing all sorts of things that were unheard of before. These are trends. This did not necessarily happen in the Middle Ages. But this is a challenge, and you have to know how to deal with it in a revolutionary way. And that is what Sarah Schneer did. She did something revolutionary, and she was successful. And what's incredible about it is that these girls that came out of the Bet Yaakov system were so special. You can notice them during the dark days of the Holocaust. When in a camp you had many women and men, you can tell which girl was from Bet Yaakov. She was the one who was not giving up. She was the one that was courageous. She was the one that if she had some extra food, she gave it to the hungry old man. These were the girls from Bet Yaakov, where the other ones from the Haskalah gave up hope. They were just thinking of themselves. These girls, these righteous girls, were found lighting candles for Shabbat, were found smuggling some margarine to light the lights of Hanukkah. These are the only girls in the camp who knew which day of the week it was, only because of the training and the teachings that they received in Bet Yaakov. Incredible. I was very moved, very, very moved when I read the whole story of this young, courageous woman who did not live too long, but accomplished so much, because she was aware of the dangers, aware of the problems, and she faced it head on, despite all this opposition from religious people. You know, it's enough we have problems with the non-religious, with the goyim. Here she had to contend with rabbis, Orthodox people, but Baruch Hashem she won, because they realized she was right. The reason I mention this today is because this gives you an idea of how important it is today for women too, to learn the basics at least, so that they're, chas v'shalom, not influenced by all the many more influences that we have today than they had back then. All the temptations that are out there. How are you going to defend yourself? You have to know how to deal with it, how to contend with this. You have to therefore become knowledgeable. That generation, I would like to say, was seduced by the same seduction that the Nachash used for Adam and Chava. Why don't you eat from this Etz Hadat, Tov V'Ra? V'yitem kelokim. Yodei Tov V'Ra. You will become like gods. You will know everything, the good and the bad. I always had a question. That's interesting that the Nachash is pointing out the fact that from this tree you could know what's good and what's bad. In other words, you can know the bad things too. What the Etz Hadat represented was something very dangerous, that if you do not have the proper direction, there's certain things that you won't know how to use, what to do with them. There's Tov V'Ra. It clearly says this tree of knowledge will give you the knowledge between good and bad. In other words, you will know what's bad. Why know what's bad? It's dangerous if you don't have the proper direction. They will therefore prohibited from getting involved with something that is dangerous. Besides that, there are certain things that you're not supposed to know. Why? Because our mind is limited. And we're not capable of fully understanding everything there is. So Hashem, for a good reason, prohibited man from eating on his own from Etz Hadat. I say on his own because Hashem eventually intended to give him from the Etz Hadat. Just wait. In time, I will give you. I know how much to give you and what to give you. Don't take on your own. There's a lot of knowledge out there, but people do not know what to take, how much to take. Many people rush to the Kabbalah. They don't realize that there is an order of what to learn first. So it's dangerous. Rabbis tell us that in order for us to receive the proper hashkafot, the proper outlook, in order for us to have strong emunah, we need to do the following. Aseh lecharav. Number one needs to have a rabbi. Number two, one needs to associate with good people. Dibuk chaverim, they call it. And number three, they tell us kviot itim la Torah. You need to regularly study Torah. And in this way, by doing all this, one will hopefully become immune, not 100% guarantee, but hopefully immune from all these external forces that are trying to weaken one regularly and daily. But I want to talk about the first one, Aseh lecharav. The reason why rabbis put a great emphasis on having a rabbi, having someone to teach you, even though one can learn from many people, but one especially that should be the one that you should consult with for most questions, is because this allows one to clear his mind from any doubts and questions that he may have. One of the most unhealthiest things that one can have is questions and doubts. You know how many people who went through the Holocaust have still, till today, if they're still alive, questions about where was God? And that's so terrible. I feel bad for them. If you have a question, why don't you ask somebody who's competent, and you may not get a full answer, because we don't know everything. But at least you'll get some reasoning that may satisfy you. But ask. They chose to live their life with all these complaints, their doubts and questions. Aselech harav, therefore, is very important. You need to have someone. We sometimes have questions. Today we buy most of our meat from the butcher. But back then, whether it was in Iran or whether it was in Europe or elsewhere, there were questions that arose from, is this chicken kasher or not? It was just slaughtered. This piece of meat, it has this problem. Is it kasher or not? Whether it was the butcher or the one who bought the meat, they had to run to the rabbi, sometimes Friday afternoon, after it was cooked in the soup. Is the soup not tarev? Do I have to throw the whole thing out and start cooking all over again? Questions came up. So we need a Rav to ask questions. But especially if the questions have to do with emunah, that makes things a little bit even more urgent. You don't want to have any questions about emunah. There are some people, however, who claim that they can learn everything on their own. And there was such an individual. There was an individual who came to the rabbi, and the rabbi asked him, "Who's your rabbi? Where do you learn?" "I learned on my own. I have, Baruch Hashem, I bought a whole library of books." Shows a whole bunch of books. "Baruch Hashem, I learned." He says, you know who you're like? You remind me of someone who was very, very sick. And he used to get sick very often. And he decided to buy the whole pharmacy. So he can always have the drugs. And every day he would take a different one to cure him from all his diseases. Does that make any sense to you? Of course not. You cannot take all the medications. Every medication is fit for some other disease. Not every medication is fit for every individual. You need to speak to a pharmacist, one who's familiar with all this. He will be able to guide you which to take, how much to take. You can't do it on your own. So therefore, you cannot learn all the Torah on your own. It's impossible. The rabbis even discourage one who knows what he's learning from learning on his own, but to learn with a havruta, to learn with a companion. So each one can ask questions, each one can criticize the other one if he made a mistake, point out things that he would not realize on his own. That is the beauty and the importance of learning together in a group, in a class, with a havruta, with a teacher. And if there are any questions, one can ask, but not to learn on one's own, by yourself. I mean, there are times you can review something by yourself. You're at home, you can read a book. It's that which is simple and basic, something that you've learned in the past. But something which is new, especially a difficult topic, one needs to learn in a group, or at least have somebody that he can turn to for clarification. Before one learns Torah, however, one needs to appreciate what the Torah is, where it comes from, and what it's for. Rabbis tell us, what's the importance of learning Torah? You want to know what it is? It's not just our heritage that we inherited. The Torah is what gives us direction. Without it, we cannot get along in this world. It's a manual of instructions. You want to know how to live your life, how to keep Shabbat. You have no choice. So number one, the Torah, we need to realize, is important to us because it gives us direction. Number two, it also gladdens our heart. It makes us happy. We go through life, we have our ups and downs, we have our moods. Aliyot v'yeridot. All sorts of problems and challenges and difficulties, whether it's in one's home or outside at work. And that could lead to depression, disappointment, grievances, problems. And people can become discouraged from working so hard. One learns Torah, it makes him happy. It really brings joy into one's heart when he learns Torah. It makes him forget about his problems. Number three, which is one of the most important, perhaps, reasons for learning Torah, and that is that the Torah matzila otanu min hachet. It protects us from the Yetzer Hara, from committing sins. It recharges our spiritual batteries. Without it, we would not be able to fight off the Yetzer Hara. There are many people who simply fall only because they have no Torah. Had they been learning a little bit Torah during the day, they would be able to fight off the Yetzer, the evil inclination. But they don't have strong batteries, and they're tempted by some woman, and they fall, even though they're married, because they don't have the strength to fight off the Yetzer Hara. The Torah gives us that strength. The Torah also protects one from all sorts of evil things. As the rabbis tell us, when one performs a mitzvah, that mitzvah offers him protection. But that protection doesn't last long, because that protection is like the light of a candle. Kiner mitzvah v'Torah or. The mitzvah is like the light of a candle. It gives some light. But the Torah has great light. It continues to protect one even after you close the books and you go home. It will protect one. So the Torah also offers protection. And last but not least, also very important, the Torah is the tool shemeromemet et ha'adam. It elevates the human being. That is the only way that one can elevate himself over his animal being. Not only does it elevate him, that he can take full control of his animal, but it does something incredible. It is able to save him from his mazal, to elevate him above the mazal, above everything else. Those who have studied Torah have had complete control not only of themselves but of all their surroundings. The animals fear them. Animals may not fear you or may fear you. What does it depend on? If one has the Tzelem Elokim on him. Do you have the image, that Tzelem that God gave you? If not, then one may appear to another animal as an animal. Why should an animal attack you unless he thinks you're an animal? But if the animal would see the Tzelem Elokim on the human being, it would never think of attacking him. So this Torah, meromemet oto al kol ha'ma'asim, it elevates him above everything. He's in charge. He's in control. Now we can understand what the rabbis tell us. You have no freer person, you have no greater freedom than the one who learns Torah. Freedom? Why? There's a lot of people who claim they're free, they're not slaves, they have money. You know what freedom means? Freedom doesn't mean what we think it means. It doesn't mean not being a slave, it doesn't mean having money, being able to do what you want. Because the reality is you can't do anything you want. There are laws in this land. There's police. You can't get your hands on anything you want. So what does freedom mean? Freedom from one's mazal. In other words, when one learns Torah, when one elevates himself, he's free. He's in control. The mazal is not in control of him. He can change his mazal. But besides that, there's one more thing that is very important for us to know. Ben Chorin, a free man, means that when one sees a problem, he knows how to deal with it. He's not afraid. He will not run away from it. He's so strong in his emunah because of all the Torah that he has. He says, Kol me'ashamayim. I think I gave you the example, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? Or maybe it was in one of the speeches on Shabbat, about someone who has a lack of bitachon. We spoke about emunah just now, but we haven't spoken about bitachon some other time. Bitachon means reliance in God. There are a lot of people who believe in God created the world. There are a lot of people who are not sure if God continues to supervise the world. That's called bitachon. Because if He still supervises it, then why does He allow that wretched individual, that miserable man, that evil guy, to make millions of dollars when he doesn't fulfill any mitzvot and he's such a bad person? Whereas that guy who's so righteous and such a tzaddik is so poor and so struggling. Why? This is one of the things we will be talking about. This is one of the questions, difficult questions that people have. If one does not have any Torah, he will have a hard time to deal with this. How is he going to deal with it? Comes along Midat HaBitachon and says, wait a minute, Hashem told me that everything that is due to me, I will receive. From Rosh Hashanah, it has been determined how much money you're going to make. Right? Everybody heard about this? On Rosh Hashanah? You have your mazal, but on Rosh Hashanah they decide status quo or more or less. Now, let's say you have a hardware store on Beverly Boulevard. Okay? You're doing well for the past 10 years, you build up yourself, you have a good name, you have customers, and you're doing well. One day, the guy who prays next to you decides that he has a great idea. He's going to open up a hardware store across the street from you. He's not only a Jew, he prays with you, he sits next to you. And he decides to open up the same thing across the street from you. Are you going to feel bad or not? Is it going to disturb you? It shouldn't. But it does. A lot of people are disturbed by it. He's taking away from my parnassah. He's competing with me. But sir, if you go to Mexico City, you go downtown, you will see a whole block of shoe stores, and they all have parnassah. Ask them. Go to the jewelry district. They're all crying there anyway. You know, they always complain that there's no, but they're still making money. Even though there's so many people selling jewelry. There's a whole building, floor after floor of jewelry. They're crying, they're complaining, but they're still making money. I don't know how. I have to ask Mr. Abraham, how do they do it? How do they do it? They all do it. Huh? Does everybody come to you? No, they go to other places too. But people come to him too. People come to him. So if somebody opens up a store across the street, why should it upset him? Because he has no bitachon. If he has bitachon Hashem, he would say, you know what? Fine. I'm not going to be bothered by it because my parnassah will not be affected. There's another level of bitachon. The higher level of bitachon says as follows. Not only am I not upset, sheyelo labriut, as we say in Hebrew. I wish him the best. May he succeed. Isn't that a higher level? He's not only bothered, he's also happy for the man. We're not done. There's a third level. He goes over across the street. Hi, Shimon. You want me to help you? You want me to help you in the same business that you're competing with me? I don't think anyone here has ever heard of somebody like that, right? It takes a lot of guts, but it takes more than guts. It takes bitachon Hashem. Why not? He's not going to affect my parnassah anyway. Only one who has true bitachon can do something like that. Most people will not even look at the other guy in the face. Took it away. They would even sue him in court. Or in Bedin, not court, Bedin. It's a lack of bitachon. One who learns Torah properly, he has the right attitude, he has the right hashkafot. He understands. Why is he a ben chorin? Now you understand why he's a free man? Because he's not bothered. He's not worried. A person who is worried and bothered, he's not a free man. A person who asks questions is not a free man. A person who has doubts is not a free man. You thought you knew what was free? Who is free? He has money, he can do what he wants? No. A free man is one who's able to contend with all of life's difficulties and challenges with the right state of mind, with the right attitude, with simcha, with joy, because he understands that he's the boss. He runs the world house as he pleases. I may not fully understand his actions, but I learned Torah and I have an idea. And one thing I know for sure is that parnassah is in his hands, so I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to try my best. I'm going to write a resume. I'm going to look at the LA Times. I'm going to go for interviews. You're going to make an ishtadlut, an effort, yeah. I mean, if you have a big bitachon, you can sit at home with your hands like this, says they're going to come knocking on my door. See, if you had a lot of bitachon, you could sit here a whole day. Your clients will come to you here. They will come looking for you. A person has to be on that level that Hashem, I want to learn. I don't want to go downtown. Send them here. Send them to my house. There's no reason why Hashem can't do that. But you need to be on that level. Bezat Hashem, we should be on that level. But you see what the Torah does? It gives us that strength to be able to contend with all the issues. When one learns Torah, his emunah becomes clearer to him. His emunah is strengthened. When he sees difficult things happening to his family or to Am Yisrael, he doesn't complain to Hashem, why are you doing this? He's able to reason with it because he's stronger. Anyway, so I gave you this introduction because B'ezrat Hashem in the following months we will be B'ezrat Hashem presenting various questions, difficult questions, many issues in Judaism, very interesting issues that B'ezrat Hashem we will answer, talk about and elaborate on. But what difference will this make? if I give you all these answers? Well, Baruch Hashem, most of you that I know are somewhat strong in emunah and perhaps will accept the answers. But there are individuals who are out there who may not easily accept the answers. What's the difference between you and them? In order to accept the answer, we're talking about a valid answer, a true answer to a difficult question, there are several conditions that have to be met. Condition number one, that individual needs to be a little bit nichna or mitbatel. He needs to be somewhat humble. Because if he thinks highly of himself, if he distrusts you, he's not humble, then he might not go along with your answer. That's number one. He needs to know that the Torah is the samchuta elyona. It is the highest authority of all. He needs to be willing to accept this explanation even though he may disagree with it. In other words, in order for an answer to make any difference in someone's life, in order for him to go along with it, to accept it, he has to realize that the Torah is the supreme authority. And if that's what the Torah has to say about this issue, I will accept it. He has to be humble, otherwise he wouldn't go along with that either. You see what I mean? One who does not therefore admit that the Torah is the supreme authority, that the Torah is min hashamayim, so how do you expect him to go along with it? So if you tell me, you want to bring somebody here, bring everybody. But just remember, even though the questions will be good questions, the answers to Hashem will be the right answers, nevertheless, it does not mean that everybody will be convinced unless they are humble, unless they admit that the Torah is the supreme authority, because what is going to be said can be proven. But if he doesn't believe the Torah is min hashamayim, we're going to be talking to the wall. So there are various conditions to be able to accept the answers. I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to something similar to Timtum Halev. Most of you are familiar with mortgages. There's something called being in first place. A bank loves to be in first place. You try to get a second on your property and the interest rate is going to be higher, right? Why is the interest rate higher on a second trust deed? Anybody know? Because what? No.
Bigger risk.
It's a bigger risk. What happens if the guy goes bankrupt and there's only so much money left in the house? Who gets the money first? Which loan will be satisfied completely? Not even half. Completely they'll satisfy the first loan. Whoever's in first position, right? So whoever is the second or third trust deed is a little bit concerned. Is there enough equity? Is the guy making enough money? Let me see your income tax return, right? That's called the strength of being in first position. Unfortunately, what happens if a Jew in his first position in his mind has what we call in Hebrew de'ot kdumot? He has other philosophies that he learned. It will be difficult to remove them, to supplant them with new information. Reshit Chokhmah Yirat Hashem. The beginning of all wisdom, the foundation of everything, before you learn anything, has to be fear of Hashem. Because if you don't have Yirat Hashem in first place, and you put in first place all the Chokhmot in the world, it's going to be difficult to convince this Russian immigrant who's 55. Communism is nonsense. There's a God to the world. And he might say, what are you talking about? That's nonsense. There's no such thing. It's very difficult to convince them because for 55 years he was brainwashed, and what was put in first position of his mind? Communism, atheism. It's hard to remove what's in first position. He is stronger. Whoever is there in first place is stronger. You see why it's so important to give the children from when they're early on, young. Reshit Chokhmah Yirat Hashem, give it to them when they're 3-4 years old. Put that in first position. Because whatever is in first position is going to be stronger. So therefore, anybody who comes here with something else in first position, other ideas, other religions, other philosophies, he's going to have a harder time unless he meets the following conditions. Yesh lo rosh patuach, he has an open mind. Not too many people have that. An open mind. He has an open mind. Well, what does that mean? He's willing to start from scratch. Let's reanalyze everything. Open mind. Number 2, yesh lo she'ifa la'emet, he aspires to know the truth. I want to know the truth. I'm not afraid of it. And, of course, he's prepared to make changes if necessary. Because the reason why I include this is because imagine somebody discovering the truth at 75. I don't want to change my home. Change my kitchen now, make it kosher? Forget it. Yeah, you're right, it makes sense. God created the world, okay, so what? He has to be prepared to make a change. If you don't have all of this, then again, you're talking to the wall. An open mind, he really wants to know the truth. He aspires to know the truth. And who aspires, by the way, who aspires to know the truth? How do you know if somebody aspires to know the truth? You know how you can recognize somebody like that you have a good chance of bringing him back with tshuva? Somebody who's not afraid to say, I made a mistake, number 1. Very difficult to find somebody like that.
Okay.
What?
To be modeh.
To be modeh, because that's the first condition for doing teshuvah. So how do you know somebody's aspiring? He's really a true, honest person. If you can somehow detect if he is prepared to say, I made a mistake. How many husbands do that to their wives? Honey, I made a mistake, you're right. Very difficult, because you have an ego. The man has an ego. What can you do? So it's not easy. It sounds easy, but it's not. To say, I made a mistake, I was wrong. For 50 years I was wrong. Well, this man is even willing to learn from those who are younger than him. Also an ego problem. Right? He's willing to learn even from those who are younger, from his kids. Because he wants the truth. And number 3, he actually makes an effort to look for classes. He actually goes. He searches for it. That is how you know if a person is really willing to, he aspires to the truth. Now, during the time of the Inquisition, there were some very knowledgeable Jews. They learned a lot. They studied all the philosophies. But when it came to the Inquisition, even though they knew a lot, they failed. They couldn't take the torture, and they either became marranos, hidden Jews, or converted. Here I was telling you the importance of being prepared, of defending yourself, of learning, and here they failed. So I have to remind you, I have to go back to something else. Learning and knowing is not enough. We still have to have the tmimut. Because all those who only depended on their learning and were not tamim, they failed when it came time to give their life for what they believe in. Only one who's tamim, who's sincere, who believes blindly in his faith, only he can give his life for what he believes in. One who only philosophizes about it does not have the strength, the courage to go along with it till the very end. So remember, it's important to know to defend yourself. You need to know the answers to the questions. But that by itself is also not enough. One still has to have the tmimut. Tamim tiyem Hashem Elokecha. Otherwise, Chas v'Shalom, in great, difficult times, one's emunah may fail. When it comes to learning, there's a certain seder, what to learn first. In Pirkei Avot it's spelled out, Chumash, Mikra, right? Mishnayot, Gemara, Halacha. Kabbalah is not the first thing. When you learn Torah, if you're already ready to learn Torah, learn it according to the proper seder. Now I agree and I admit that every soul, Yeshlo Netiyah Mesuyemet, has a certain inclination to learn certain things. There are some who will specialize in Kabbalah, some that will specialize in Halacha. Not everybody specializes in everything, just like you don't have a doctor specializing in all the parts of the body. One has to learn the basics, however. You need to learn Halachot. If you want to specialize in Kabbalah, but you first have to know Halacha, fine. If that's what your neshama is drawing you to, okay. Little by little, but first know the basics. You got to know halachot, halachot Shabbat, how to conduct yourself as a Jew. It's important, therefore, to follow the seder, not to jump around. Another point that I like to mention is that there are some personalities, some individuals who like to argue, like to disagree. That's just their personality, their nature. Please remind them. I hope there's nobody in here like that. You cannot argue on a subject that you're not familiar with. People have argued with me about astrology. What are you talking about? It's shtuyot, it's nonsense, it doesn't exist. Have you ever studied it? If you studied it and then you tell me that you don't have a problem with it, you have an issue, you want to argue with it, I'm willing to hear your argument. I'm willing to hear your opinions, but you have no right to even express an opinion, not even an opinion, if you didn't give yourself a chance to compare, what's out there, to analyze what's there, to study it. How could you even voice your opinion? I don't want to hear such an opinion because it's not worth it. It's not worth anything. An opinion is only worth if it's coming from some knowledge base. You've done your homework, you've looked into it, and you want to express your opinion. Did you have some doubts about it? Fine. Questions about it. Or you disagree with something? Fine. We can argue, we can talk about it. One who argues, disagrees, stop him right there. First learn. Then give me your opinion. Tell me what problem you have with it. But you can't just complain, disagree, and argue if you haven't studied the subject matter. Just like to end that in our generation, unfortunately, because of the great, enormous detachment of Jews from their tradition, it requires more effort on our part to convince than in the past, because there are many Jews, many of our brothers, who are in the mud, they're in the bots, they're so deep into the tum'ah that therefore they need to be convinced much more than in the past. We somehow have to therefore present them Judaism packaged in such a way that is even more convincing than in the past. It requires therefore more effort, more ingenuity, and consistent labor, not to give up, because there are beautiful diamonds out there. They just need to be polished. There's a lot of dirt to remove, and they will come back. But it's possible, but it needs a lot more effort, a lot more convincing. I hope that B'ezrat Hashem, through all these questions and the subjects that we will cover during this coming year, we will be able to strengthen our emunah and strengthen our pride in our Torah and strengthen B'ezrat Hashem our devotion to our Torah. Amen.